Are You OK Day is one day of the year, but life is every day. So if you spot the signs a friend, family member, colleague or loved one might be struggling, you can ask, are you OK any day? An average of 8 people die by suicide every day in Australia alone. For every death, it's estimated 30 people will attempt to take their life. And 89% of people report knowing someone who has attempted it.
Make every day Are You OK Day. No qualifications needed.
Grab a coffee, tea, whatever it is. Just say, hey, you okay? Everything good?
Ask, are you okay? Because a conversation could change your life.
When you're in the midst of the deepest depths of depression, when you actually are feeling suicidal or close to it, being asked if you're okay is the worst. It's the worst. It's extremely stressful as a mentally ill person to know that, okay, on this day, I'm going to be potentially put on the spot by literally any person that I come across.
Hi everyone. So every year here in Australia, we celebrate what is called Are You OK Day. Are You OK is an Australian suicide prevention organisation with the message of a conversation could change a life. The premise of Are You OK Day is to raise awareness, start a conversation about mental illnesses and suicidality through checking in with your friends, families, loved ones, colleagues or anyone around you by simply asking, are you okay? Are You OK was founded by Gavin Larkin in 2009. After losing his father to suicide in 1996 and falling into depression, Larkin decided to do a personal development course to cope with his grief. As one of the projects of this course, he had to come up with something that would be beneficial to a community that he's a part of. Larkin chose suicide prevention and came up with Are You OK?
The thought of doing a day of action became really the imperative, and on the spot called it Are You OK Day. Today is the day that I need to think about someone other than myself who might be struggling, and reach out and say, are you okay?
Since then, Are You OK Day has taken off as one of the biggest days to be celebrated here in Australia, with famous celebrities of Australia, if not the world, such as Hugh Jackman, Naomi Watts and Simon Baker endorsing the message. Larkin passed away from cancer in 2011, but the message of Are You OK is still kept alive by his family and loved ones, and the organization has now ballooned up to have this huge promotional campaign every year, raising millions of dollars. Are You OK Day is celebrated every year on the second Thursday of September. This year it fell on the 12th of September, so I am very late to this topic as usual. But every year when Are You OK Day rolls around between late August to early September, bright yellow posters and billboards can be seen all over Australia. Many companies and schools would celebrate Are You OK Day by wearing bright yellow t-shirts, having bright yellow balloons and bright yellow cupcakes. I remember back when I was in high school, we even had people from Are You OK come in at one point to give a speech on mental health awareness. Needless to say, this is a pretty big thing here in Australia. This is something that would be hard to miss. And before I go any further, I do want to say that overall, I agree with the message of Are You OK Day. I do think that it is important for people to reach out, to check in, to connect with their loved ones on how they're doing. I am somebody who has struggled with mental health issues pretty much my entire life. At my lowest point, I have attempted to take my own life. I know how deeply isolating and dark that headspace can be, so having a support system, knowing that you have people in your life that you can count on, that have your back, that you can rely on, can make the difference between life and death. Yet every year, many people who suffer from chronic mental illnesses, myself very much included, get this icky feeling on Are You OK Day. For me personally, it's this deep malaise that is hard to verbalize, where I know that behind the noble message, the bright yellow balloons and cupcakes, the well intentions of people asking me if I'm okay, something is wrong. Something is deeply wrong with these sorts of mental health activism or awareness, and given that since 2011, Are You OK has received over $2.7 million in taxpayers' funding, I think they deserve some scrutiny at the very least. So after doing a lot of thinking and pondering, doing research, reading articles written by all sorts of people, I have finally come up with some reasons as to why I think Are You OK Day is not as effective as it claims to be. When you take all of these reasons into account, it makes you realize that, especially as a mentally ill person, Are You OK Day is not just pretentious and superficial, but is actually pretty pointless. To clarify, when I say that something is pointless, I mean that it's unable to achieve what it aims to do. For Are You OK, that is a suicide prevention organization, their aim is to prevent suicide, obviously. So their goal must be to help people that are in that precarious state to get the help that they need, whether that be therapy, social support programs, psychiatric medication, etc. But all Are You OK Day focuses on, promotes and advocates for is simply asking people if they're okay, checking in on them, seeing how they're going, just once a year. This is well-intentioned, of course, but suicide is an extremely complex psychological issue. For someone to get to that point where they're thinking of taking their own life, ending it all and leaving everything behind, they need far more support than just an annual check-in. I feel like they've taken on the criticism of how Are You OK Day focuses on just one day of the year, as now they're saying, ask Are You OK any day, and I'm not saying that check-ins can't help, it definitely can, especially if it's your loved ones that you feel comfortable opening up to, but it is still a short-term solution. Many people view suicidal ideation as this hurdle, as this rough patch that somebody is going through that can be talked out of, instead of a clinical psychological problem. In actuality, suicidality is more like a wave to an ocean of underlying problems, with high and low tides, symptom of a much larger issue. In the moment, asking the suicidal person if they're okay, having a conversation with them may help, it may even talk them out of doing the act, but if the underlying current of those problems, the root of the issue is not addressed, those suicidal thoughts may return, and it may return in tides that are even higher, stronger than before. Claiming that something as serious as suicide can be dealt with by a simple check-in, a question, a conversation that can change a life, downplays the seriousness of it. It trivializes severe mental illnesses that are deadly enough for you to be willing to take your life just so you can be put out of your misery. It minimizes clinical mental illnesses as just a bad day, just a rough little patch that you're going through. What I'm trying to say is that yes, suicidal and mentally ill people need to be checked in for sure, but that on its own is not enough. If you're unfortunate enough to get to that state where you're having thoughts of ending your life, you need much more support. You need the help of professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, medication, social support. And that brings me to my next point, which is that Are You OK puts the responsibility of tackling someone's mental health problems onto everyday people, on friends, family members, colleagues, acquaintances. Like a couple years ago, they really harped on about how anyone can ask Are You OK? You don't need to be an expert, you don't even need any qualifications.
Make every day Are You OK Day. No qualifications needed.
That is not good. Because most everyday average people aren't equipped to deal with mental health conditions, especially if it's about something as serious as suicide, where it's a matter of life and death. Most people don't know what the right thing to say is. Most people don't have mental health professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists as friends or family members. Combine that with a lack of general knowledge that most people have about mental health conditions, with many people believing that depression is the same thing as sadness to this day, this can put people in an even more isolated state than they already are. In my experience, the way Are You OK Day usually goes is that people will ask me if I'm okay, but if I answer with anything other than a cheery yes or actually open up about what I'm going through, they get uncomfortable and don't want to delve any further. which is fine. They don't have to do anything that makes them uncomfortable, but that sort of defeats the purpose of Are You Okay, doesn't it? Because the whole purpose of Are You Okay Day is to have a day where you do feel safe enough to open up, to get help, to have those life-changing conversations. But how are you supposed to do that when most people that you're talking to aren't ready to have those conversations, that invalidate and dismiss you, that have no intentions of helping you get through your issues, to get to the root of the problem other than a superficial, "Are you okay?" I mean, why even bother asking if you're not willing to hear anything other than what you want to hear? Now, you can still argue that Are You Okay at least attempts to have a conversation. It attempts to open up a dialogue about mental illnesses and suicide. It's a nice gesture. It's a start to tackling and addressing the underlying cause of mental illnesses, to come up with productive solutions or ways to prevent suicide. But unfortunately, that's all it is. A start. Because it's been over a decade now since Are You Okay was founded, and their methods of mental health activism or awareness hasn't progressed any further than simply asking people if they're okay. Again, from my experience, people that celebrate Are You Okay Day, raise awareness on mental health issues, would often say things like, "I am here for you. You can always come to me whenever you need. I'll always be here to listen and support you." But then when you actually do that, actually do reach out to them when you're having a hard time, they turn you down. They don't know what to say, they seem uncomfortable. It's like they never actually expected people to take their word and do the things that they have told them to do. And many people who suffer from chronic mental health issues have had similar experiences. This sort of half-assed activism, if you can even call it that, where you're making empty promises and giving false hope, virtue signaling once a year on how much you care about mental health and how you'd always be here to support those who need, only to turn your back on them, is far worse, in my opinion, than no activism at all. Because by pretending to care about mental illnesses, claiming that you'd always be there for someone, you're giving them hope only to turn them down. For someone who actually is going through a rough time, who does need someone to talk to, this is so disheartening. You're promising them support, you're giving them hope, you're building them up, only to reject them after, when they're already vulnerable and are going through a hard time. Are You Okay Day can be a good start to having broader, deeper conversations about mental health that can be life-changing, but it almost never gets to that point. There is no follow-up, no more check-ins other than that one day of the year, no acknowledgements of systemic or structural issues that may cause mental illnesses. One of the biggest problems that I have with Are You Okay is that the focus seems to be solely on the person asking the question rather than the person that is being asked. On their website, they have an entire section on how to ask. They provide a whole bunch of resources like posters, flowcharts, guides. That's all well and good, but what about the person that is being asked if they're okay? Where are the resources for them on how to open up, how to talk about what's going on without feeling pressured or overwhelmed, how to determine who is really there for you and would be safe for you to talk to? Are You Okay Day is a day that is meant for people who are struggling, for them to have an opportunity to finally open up, to get the help that they need, yet for some reason, the focus is not on them. It's a day about mental health and suicide awareness, but they are not the center of the discussion. So how do people that are struggling or have struggled with mental illnesses and suicidality really feel about Are You Okay? This article by Caroline Duncan talks about her friend who she called Geoff for the article. Geoff is chronically depressed and has even attempted suicide at one point, something that only his family and close friends know about. Every year, he dreads going to work on Are You Okay Day, to the point he even considers calling in sick. Geoff says his office will hold a morning tea with orange balloons, sandwiches, cakes, and the much-coveted social function sausage rolls. Management and staff will mingle, make small talk and laugh as they ask, "Are you okay?" like they do every year. And Geoff will answer yes, because why on earth would he open up about his psychological pain in this sort of setting? So for Geoff, Are You OK Day trivializes and makes a mockery of his struggles. It's the lack of sincerity, sensitivity, and seriousness that this day is approached with which makes people like Geoff, for whom this day should be about, continue to suffer in silence. It's ironic that a day encouraging people to talk about suicide makes Geoff reluctant to talk about his own attempt. These kinds of sentiment about Are You OK Day is shared by most people like Geoff who struggle with chronic mental illnesses. This article by Elizabeth Saunders from Overland Literary Journal is probably one of my favorite articles that I found for this video, where Saunders shares testimonies from people. Many mentally ill people find Are You OK Day to be triggering, intrusive, causing them to skip out on work or school, and on occasion when they would get the courage to open up, people would get overwhelmed and wouldn't know how to cope, leading them to further isolate themselves on a day where they should be getting help. Another important thing to note is that most of the board members of Are You OK have no background in mental health. They are not a service provider, they don't educate people on mental health, they're just a mental health awareness, promotional campaign organization type of thing. The chairman, Michael Conahan, has no experience or qualifications in the mental health field. The current CEO, Catherine Newton, has no experience other than being an executive. And honestly, it shows. Like in the same article, Saunders actually sits down with Brendan Mayer, who was the former CEO of Are You OK, and straight up asks him at one point, which of your resources give the person asking skills to manage if the answer is more than just, no, I'm not okay, but no, I'm not okay and I can't afford to see any psychologist until January next year. Or, no, I'm not okay and my mental illness has been classified by my psychiatrist as treatment resistant. Or any other number of serious and ongoing responses which referral to a helpline or GP is awfully insufficient to support. Mayer responded, this is not a question I can answer. Then what's the point? So, if a suicide prevention organization is making people who are suicidal and mentally ill feel worse and more isolated, with the CEO literally admitting that they have no ways of helping them, then what's the point? Why are we even doing this? The real aim of Are You OK Day is to virtue signal about mental health issues. It's for people to pretend that they care about mental health so that they can feel good about themselves without actually having to do anything productive. Are You OK is predominantly funded by corporate sponsorships, and so every year the list of brands that they're partnered by gets longer and longer. The only thing that they care about is maintaining these partners. Therefore, they must always keep a squeaky clean corporate image, which is how you end up with a suicide prevention organization that only provides help with general stress and sadness, not serious clinical mental illnesses like depression or, God forbid, suicide. Australia, just like most of the Western world, operate within a neoliberal system. Under neoliberalism, optics is very important, virtue signaling, performative activism, maintaining the image of being a good person is far more important than actually doing the right thing. So neoliberalism, despite the name, is nothing new. Like I said, most Western first world countries today operate under neoliberalism. But when you combine that with Australia's history of how it was founded, I think it makes our case quite unique. Australians worldwide have the stereotype of being laid back, positive, and easygoing. I know whenever tourists or foreigners visit Australia, they are marveled by how laid back and easygoing people are here, but that mostly is a facade. The truth is, Australia, just like most of the world, is currently going through a mental health crisis. Our suicide rate is rising, millions of people are coming out with mental disorders, more people are on antidepressants than ever, but despite that, we tend to maintain this image of being positive and laid back to the point it can almost become toxic. In the late 1700s, Britain's strict laws and punishments began to overcrowd their prisons. Petty crimes like stealing or buying or even receiving stolen goods could land you in jail. So to cope with the overflowing of inmates, in January of 1788, Captain Arthur Phillip guided a fleet of 11 British ships carrying convicts to the colony of New South Wales, essentially founding Australia. The earliest settlers of Australia were British and Irish convicts who were treated terribly terribly by the governors and other authority figures. They were forced to leave behind everything and everyone that they've ever known, endure an arduous journey on the sea under harsh conditions, and they were stripped off of their basic human rights. So to cope with their predicament, convict Australians came together and formed an egalitarian bond, the mateship, where they may not have the wealth, they may not have the education, they may not have the power, but as convicts, they're all equal. They have the shared belief of equality. And you can still see sentiments of this belief today among Australians. The egalitarian bond that the convicts formed may have been useful at the time, but today it can promote sort of a herd mentality, this circle jerk where everyone goes along with everything without questioning anything. In the case of Are You OK Day, every year it is promoted as this great, noble thing supporting a good cause, whilst silencing some of its obvious drawbacks, sometimes even from the very people that it claims to be helping. To cope with their harsh conditions of living, convict Australians had to put on a positive, laid-back attitude where they had to be easygoing and don't take things very seriously. Again, this may have been useful at the time, but today, depending on the situation, this sort of overtly positive, informal, laid-back approach can be harmful and even be toxic. Toxic positivity occurs when this overtly positive outlook is applied at every situation in life, no matter how dire or difficult it is. It's this avoidance of negative emotions through constantly looking at the bright side. The reason this sort of thinking is harmful and dysfunctional is because it's not realistic. It's not authentic for human beings to be positive and cheerful all the time. It often fails to address the root cause of the issue, preventing growth by invalidating and dismissing the problem. To me, Are You OK Day is the embodiment of toxic positivity. They have taken suicide, which is an incredibly dark and complex issue, and turned it into yet another corporate event with bright yellow balloons and cupcakes and sausage rolls. I mean, who needs therapy or social support or solutions to structural problems when you got a cupcake with a smiley face on it? But that doesn't really help though, does it? Because sometimes life really just sucks. Sometimes there is no bright side to look at. Sometimes there is no silver lining, and there are some things that you have to take seriously and deal with sensitivity, like suicide, which is a matter of life and death. As helpful as getting together as a community to come for morning tea and small talk may be, sometimes the best way to deal with a problem is to address it head-on, to get to the root of it instead of beating around the bush with yellow balloons and smiley face cupcakes, because sometimes our problems are not just problems, they are symptoms of a much larger, broader issue, a systemic, structural issue that is beyond our control. In Capitalist Realism, published in 2009, Mark Fisher talks about how under capitalism, mental illnesses are treated as solely as a clinical medical condition without any consideration of social or economic factors. There is little to no thought given to the causes behind mental health conditions, to what he calls systems of causation. Say if an individual is suffering from depression, there is the medical explanation of it, which is that they have low serotonin levels in their brain and therefore needs to be treated through being prescribed SSRIs like antidepressants, but that medical explanation doesn't explain the cause of it, on why did that person have low serotonin levels in their brain to begin with and what can be done to prevent it. If it is true, for instance, that depression is constituted by low serotonin levels, what still needs to be explained is why particular individuals have low levels of serotonin. This requires a social and political explanation, and the task of repoliticizing mental illness is an urgent one if the left wants to challenge capitalist realism. The reason, of course, is, well, capitalism. I mean, look around you. There is the housing crisis, millions of young people are crippled with debt, grocery stores are gouging prices on essential items, our planet is dying. Who wouldn't feel depressed living in this society? But for the sake of this video, I would focus on just one aspect of life under capitalism, which is work. Under late capitalism, job market under every profession has lost its stability. The type of employment that the previous generations were able to have, where they would be able to work under one company for decades and then retire, doesn't really exist anymore. Now, most full-time work has been replaced with temporary contracts, casual work, freelancing, unpaid internships, entry-level roles that still somehow require 3 to 5 years experience. The gig economy that claims to be so flexible and empowering through making you the independent contractor, but in reality, it's making you work just as much as a full-time employee without providing any of the benefits, any of the stability. As a result, you have to always be on call, be ready to work whenever asked to, because who knows when your next shift may be. For you to survive in this sort of environment, you have to be hyper-vigilant. You have to learn to deal with stress, to work under pressure, to live in precarity. There is no choice but to develop depression and anxiety because work under late capitalism fosters this scarce environment where everyone has to fight for bare survival. Work and life become inseparable. Capital follows you when you dream. Time ceases to be linear, becomes chaotic, broken down into punctiform divisions. As production and distribution are restructured, so are nervous systems. To function effectively as a component of just-in-time production, you must develop a capacity to respond to unforeseen events. You must learn to live in conditions of total instability or precarity, as the ugly nihilism has it. Periods of work alternate with periods of unemployment. Typically, you find yourself employed in a series of short-term jobs, unable to plan for the future. And even if you are lucky enough to have a full-time job, you could still get laid off at any moment and lose your income, your stability, your plans for the future. In countries like the US, where there is no universal healthcare, you're one accident, one broken leg, one sickness away from going into debt. I hope this goes without saying that constantly stressing about getting your basic needs met, living paycheck to paycheck with no means for you to plan for your future, cannot be good for your mental health. Now, I'm not saying that SSRIs are useless or all mental health issues would be resolved under a non-capitalist system, but I would be damned if I said that it wouldn't solve most of it. I can guarantee that a society that ensures everyone has universal basic income, adequate housing, access to education, food, water, sanitation, by Maslow's hierarchy of needs, their mental health will improve tremendously as well. The fact that we even have a cost of living, as in living, surviving in this society costs money, is outrageous when you really think about it. Like, you do realize that we're the only species on this planet that has to pay to stay alive, right? And as beneficial as SSRIs and mental health awareness may be, ultimately they do nothing to get to the root of the problem. Because after all, therapy doesn't solve being overworked and underpaid, and antidepressants can't cure poverty. No amount of medication or therapy can help you if you live in a society that is inherently exploitative, that demands you to live with anxiety and stress just to get your basic needs met. Over the past couple years, there has been a lot of awareness on mental health issues, but very little has actually been done to address its causes. With organizations like Are You OK that raised awareness for mental health, it has made mental health conditions less stigmatized and taboo in our society. Now, I'm all for spreading awareness of mental health conditions, but awareness on its own is not enough. Awareness is important for sure, but following awareness, there needs to be prevention, ways of deduction, productive action. Because if you have awareness without any preventative measures, that just normalizes the issue. Capitalist realism insists on treating mental health as if it were a natural fact, like weather. This is something that I've witnessed in real time. I remember just a couple of years ago, if you came out saying that you were depressed, you would be applauded for being so courageous and brave. It used to be such a powerful thing to open up about your mental health with others. You know, back in 2018, there was an entire trend on YouTube with YouTubers opening up about their mental health struggles, millions of people commending and praising them for being so authentic and vulnerable to their audience. But now, if you say that you're depressed, people just shrug it off and go, yeah, whatever, same, honestly. Because all these years of awareness and performative activism, all it has done is normalize mental illnesses. Awareness without any productive action is normalization. Now, mental health conditions are used to uphold this capitalist system because now it is seen as normal to be depressed, normal to have anxiety, normal to be suffering, normal to be struggling to live under this system. And I don't know about you, but I don't want this to be normal. I don't want it to be seen as normal that so many people, so many young people especially, are struggling with mental illnesses, that so many of us are on antidepressants, that now we can't even have an honest conversation about this without being dismissed and invalidated, that now mental illnesses have become just another part of life for most of us, like weather. This is not how it's meant to be. This is not how we're supposed to be living. But this is what organizations like Are You OK that promote awareness without any preventative actions have done. They have upheld this capitalist system by turning mental illnesses that are caused by this system into a part of human condition. This may not have been deliberate, but as the saying goes, the road to hell is often paved with good intentions. So, in conclusion, Are You OK Day may have started with a noble cause, but it has now been bastardized into performative activism that ultimately served the capital. Their hollow messaging of awareness have normalized and trivialized mental illnesses, doing more harm than good. If you're someone who suffers from mental health issues, be sure to take extra care of yourselves on Are You OK Day. Like I said, this day can be especially difficult for people that are chronically mentally ill, so take it easy, do something that you love, speak to someone that you can trust. Take the day off of school or work if you're able to. I know for me, I find it super triggering and annoying when people just come up to me asking, "Are you okay?" It's quite ironic that a day that was meant for us to give an opportunity to open up and have life-changing conversations has caused us to further isolate ourselves. But I guess that's just the world that we live in right now. And if you're one of those people that celebrate Are You OK Day, make an effort to ask others if they're okay. Can you at least be a bit more genuine about it? It's great that you want to spread awareness about mental health, but you can do so without making empty promises and giving false hope. Don't say stuff like, "I'm always going to be here for you if you ever need someone to talk to," if you know that you can't follow through with that. Don't ask, "Are you okay?" if you aren't ready to hear anything except for a resounding yes. Be more mindful of the person that you're asking to, on how would you feel if you were in their shoes. Understand that mental health and suicidality are complex issues that need far more than a check-in once a year. Awareness is important for sure, but alongside awareness, there needs to be productive actions. There needs to be social reforms, better access to therapy, healthcare, addressing the system that caused all these issues in the first place. If your activism doesn't touch on any of that and only involves spreading awareness about it just once a year, then I'm sorry to say this, but you're actively making our situation worse. You're adding insult to injury, you're invalidating and downplaying our struggles, and honestly at this point, you're better off just not doing anything at all. So that's pretty much it from me for today. I'll be honest, I was pretty nervous about making this video because, like I said, Australia has a herd mentality where people tend to just get along with everything, and every year Are You OK Day is put on a pedestal as this such a wonderful and noble thing. Everywhere you look, there are bright yellow posters just screaming at your face, and if anyone tries to speak out about it, they get shut down. Which is why every year when Are You OK Day comes around, I get such an icky feeling. I mean, at best, they're exploiting mental illnesses and suicidality to promote their organization, and at worst, they're making a mockery of and trivializing such serious issues. But as I began researching for this video and found articles sharing similar sentiments, like the ones from Elizabeth Saunders and Caroline Duncan, it finally gave me the courage to speak up, to verbalize and explain that icky feeling. So thanks to all the people that spoke out about Are You OK Day before me. There are plenty of great articles I found that I didn't get the chance to talk about in this video, but I highly recommend that you check them out. We'll have them all linked in my sources in the description. And a special thanks to this creator. Melody's video is the one that I played a bit of at the start. Her video is the only video that I found on YouTube speaking out about Are You OK Day, which is a shame because at the time of me filming this, it has only 120 views. So definitely go show her some love. We'll have it linked in the description as well. And as always, thanks for watching, especially if you made it till the end. I do apologize if this video was a bit too niche for some of you. I know there are plenty of people who watch me that do not live in Australia, so this may have been something that you have never heard of. But like I said, at this day and age, we all live under neoliberalism to an extent, and how mental health is dealt with under neoliberalism is pretty much the same regardless of where you live. So I would love to know what you think. Leave a like if you liked this video, subscribe if you haven't already. There are almost 5,000 of you watching me now. That is insane. Thank you all so much for all the support, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!